Beautiful.
Okay, here we go.
Here it is. Welcome to R7C2L in action. We are your hosts and the instructional technology specialists here in Lee Summit, Missouri. After our spring of 2020, we reflected on all those things that teachers were doing, all the things that staff were doing, and their focus and their attention. And we tried looking at, hey, what are some things that we can focus on? What are some things that we can do to prepare for the fall? And this week, our focus is going to be connected and organized. My name is Jeff Nowinski. I'm joined here on screen with Corey Bunker and John Courtney. And again, running the show from behind the scenes is Kyle Pace.
Thank you, Jeff. Today we welcome our guest, SHahr Rezaiekhaligh. She's a social studies teacher at Summit Lakes Middle School here in Lee Summit R7. And SHahr earned her bachelor's degree in history and her master's in secondary education through Truman State University. So I know John wants to give a big shout out there.
Go Bulldogs!
SHahr just finished her 10th year as an educator, all of her years being with us in R7. And she currently teaches 7th grade social studies at Summit Lakes. In her free time, she likes to read, practice yoga, and record TikToks to show her students how much she misses them. So go TikToks, yeah. Look her up. Welcome, SHahr. We appreciate you being here with us today. Would you mind just kind of telling us a little bit about your current role, maybe a little about the curriculum that you teach at Summit Lakes in social studies, and what other things maybe you're involved in at Summit Lakes as far as extracurricular leadership kinds of things or anything like that?
Yes, so first of all, thanks for inviting me here today. I've been teaching at Summit Lakes for 10 years. All those 10 years I've had 7th grade history, which we just became ancient world history officially. So that's the content that I teach, but we just changed our name. So basically from the beginning of time all the way through to the Middle Ages. That's always my finger crossed there. So I'm kind of one of students' first experiences really getting into history outside of the United States, which is something that I love about teaching ancient history. Outside of teaching, I'm still recovering from being a cheer coach. So I still think I'm a cheer coach, but I'm not because I'm not planning a camp, which is kind of weird. And then I also help run our student-led conferences. I'm in charge of that at Summit Lakes. I also serve on our diversity team, both the district diversity team and our buildings diversity team. And then, basically I'm just kind of a go-to person as far as helping out. I love to present at different professional developments and just kind of offer up what I know as well as learning from others. So anything collaborative like that, we do things like roundtables at our building once a month. So that's really awesome time to go share what we've been learning, what we've been doing in our classrooms, and then hearing from other teachers as well. So it's kind of some of the things that I do at Summit Lakes.
Yeah, and we really appreciate your leadership, and I know you got a lot of shout outs on our Twitter promotions about how much respect you have by your building colleagues. How do you see digital learning? How does that fit with what you do with social studies or maybe even in extracurricular things at Summit Lakes?
Yeah, the thing I like most about Schoology is that it can be a one-stop shop for students. So extracurricularly, I like to use the groups. I also have kind of been volunteering to help with our steppers that have been trying to get started at Summit Lakes. And so creating a group for them to be able to have conversations and plan events, those types of things is great. It's also great for parent communication, that group setting as far as working with extracurriculars. So I do love that aspect of Schoology. In my classroom, as far as ancient history, I kind of, especially once we went to virtual learning, it's a version of my classroom. So I want students to feel the same way walking into our course on Schoology as they do walking into my classroom. I want them to feel comfortable. I want them to feel at ease. I want them to be able to clearly know where everything is and what resources that they need. Because finding, a Quizlet Live is the same thing as trying to find a stapler in a classroom, right? It just has to be labeled appropriately for them to use. And then I want it to make sure that it facilitates their learning, that it helps their learning, but that it's not hindering them. I don't want it to be a point of stress for them when they go to our course. And so in class versus virtually, it looks a little bit differently, obviously. So in class, it's a little bit more of like the skeleton of what we're doing that day. I don't always start the same way, that kind of thing, but I like to use it obviously for resources and what we're doing in class, or additional practice, extension of learning. But then once we went virtual, it kind of became the whole thing. So one of the biggest things that I changed in my learning environment in Schoology when we went virtually is asking more questions to get kids to connect personally. So a little bit more focus on that social emotional, and a little bit like not less focus on the content, but in addition to the content. So I always had something in there to help the kids connect. Even if it was a would you rather question on a discussion board, or embedding a flip grid where they could share kind of how they're feeling from that past week, things like that. So again, kind of like a skeleton in a general setting, but virtually, right, kind of becomes everything.
I'm hearing your beliefs come out of that community and culture mindset, and having my own son be in your classroom, I know that in a face-to-face environment, that's important to you as well. Thank you for pointing all those out, because as we approach the fall and everyone's just up in the air about what things will look like, providing that environment for kids, like you pointed out, the one-stop shop opportunity and the ways we can connect with the kids.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome. And I want to take an opportunity too, Shahr, to welcome you to hashtag R7C2L in action. That's R7 Connect to Learn in action. And so we, from one world history teacher or ancient world history teacher to another, happy Bastille Day to you on today, July 14th. Right? So as we are digging into this YouTube live session here, clearly I'm bringing the comedy, but as we're digging into YouTube live, I want everyone watching online to know that we'd love for you to interact with us through the chat feature on YouTube Live. Kyle Pace behind the scenes is going to be copying and pasting your chats into a place we can see them, and we'll address those towards the end of this. So if you have questions for Shahr as she just shares a little bit about her experience with us, feel free to ask those in the chat. As we talk connected and organized, Shahr, I really think it's important that that teachers are organized in a digital learning environment for the benefit of their students. That's so huge. It's a must. A couple of things that does. It helps teachers clearly deliver their content, as you mentioned, right? Finding the stapler. It creates a sense of order for parents and families to support student learning. And really, it's just, it's one of the most critical components to running an effective digital learning environment. And so we're happy to have you here to share a little bit more about that with us today. And we're excited to talk and ask you some further questions. So with that, Jeff, I'm going to throw it to you for the first question officially to Shahr, even though I feel like we've covered some ground already.
Awesome. I unmuted myself successfully, and I'm going to ask the first question. Shahr, all teachers in the LSR7 school district, we're using Schoology, and whether that's for in-person classes, whether it's for blended learning, whether it's for online instruction, what should we keep in mind when organizing a Schoology course for students? What is it that rises to the top as maybe like a list of a couple things maybe that teachers should keep in mind as we're organizing a course for students? Okay, so first of all, I'm going to put myself out there that I am a huge nerd when it comes to organization. So I have to keep some of the craziness together. So for me, like, I actually enjoy going on and getting everything kind of decluttered and organized. And I have noticed, especially since I teach middle schoolers, that they really need that facilitation of organization. So I also feel like it's modeling it. So it's kind of a little bit of both. But to think about it, kind of my first thing that I go to is it going to be easy for them to use? So we all know that one of the, I guess, complaints about Schoology is all the clicks. So I try to make sure that everything is the fewest clicks as possible, as well as also, of course, teaching kids little hacks on how to open up folders without having to open a new window and all of that stuff. So by clicking on that caret. I also want to make sure when it's easy to use that means that it's labeled in a way that makes sense to them.
And so I make sure during the school year, I would organize by unit, since my curriculum was very clearly organized by unit, but other teachers might find it better to organize by the week, or maybe even organize by the standard itself, the learning target. So I feel like finding some way that's easy but consistent. So I don't want to do, if I'm going to organize one unit this way, with the title of the unit and all the standards underneath, I don't want to then go into another unit and just have it be all like thrown in there. The more consistent it is, the easier it is for the kids to use. And so I find that really helpful. I also am like a huge fan of color coding. So I always color code the unit folder. And then I get even more extra because in class, if we're in class, the notes match the color of the folder. So it's like really, it's over the top. You don't have to go that far. But I do find that the folders, because I can be click on the orange folder. I don't have to say click on this or whatever. I also find that because you can embed images on the covers of the folders, that's really nice for younger kids especially, because they can click on the image to open it up instead of having to navigate these tiny little features. Yeah. And so I think that's really helpful. When I'm in the classroom, I always just want to make sure, like, can I give them an instruction and not have to guide them click by click? So can I know that they know how to use it? And so can they navigate it without me being there? Now, this past school year, the biggest advantage was that we had been with our kids for 3 quarters. And so moving into that virtual environment, although messy and hard and stressful, I feel like is a little bit easier for them because they did know how we organize things, or didn't, before we went in to virtual learning. So that's something that is a little bit trickier. So when we go into virtual learning, I had to change a few things about how I organized folders, right? So I moved from a unit to a weekly organization. I used the front of the folder to kind of explain what's the general outline for the week. And then inside the folder, made sure everything was labeled the exact same way. Again, labeled the exact same way.
I love that. You know, what I'm hearing so much of, and I'm going to be vulnerable. When I first got into a digital learning environment, when I was first there, I really thought, how does this make sense to me? How does this work in my brain? How am I going to do this? And I think that's perfectly okay for teachers to start there, but to quickly shift and say, wait a second, is this really for me? Or is it for my 100+ students and my 100+ parents that I'm working with? And seeing all those things, when you talk to, and I'll review this a little bit later, but when you talk about color coding, when you talk about having pictures, when you talk about consistency, sometimes picking a plan and being consistent throughout, it really helps. And I think, being consistent, when you're in middle school and you have a grade level team or a team of teachers, when we talk about grade levels in elementary, when we talk about lining up teachers maybe at a high school level, that consistency, so that when that student sees something and hears something, they know, well, this is how it works in Shahr's class. But you know what? It works really pretty similar in this other class that I have right after Shahr's as well. I think that's a fantastic place for us to move and to go to. So thank you so much for saying those things. I'm sure we're going to hear some more about those things too.
Yeah, definitely. I guess going with what you were saying about putting yourself in the student's shoes, I think, and I'll mention this again later, but the thing that helped me the most as a teacher in the virtual environment is the fact that I have taken classes through R7 that were online through Schoology. And it is so different being a student in a class, because you get to see, you think you're the only way to organize something, and we don't see other teachers' classes all the time online. And so when you're in a place, you're like, oh, and that's what this person is creating, and that's what this, instructional technology specialist did. And that's what, you start to go through how people organize, and then that helped me. So just to continue shout outs, I was in John's Schoology Hacks 2 course, and in his course he used emojis, Unicode, to kind of help what was the role of what you were doing, what was the purpose. Was it just something that was a resource? Was it something that was going to be for credit? And use those icons to help kind of know that, as well as in grading as well. And so I used that when we moved virtually. I put a different emoji next to different items based on what it was. So if it's a resource that had a little question mark next to it, if it was a completion assignment that they needed to get done, it was a check mark. And then from there, if it was something that was for a mastery grade where they were getting the credit that they earned based on their mastery, then it would be a star. And I used that as a way to help students learn.
That's fantastic. I love that. You really talked about the benefits of seeing into not just your own class, but also into other people's classes. Corey, I'm going to toss it over to you for the next question.
Thanks, Jeff. And John is lights out again on week 2.
Yeah,
there we go. It's time for him to do some jumping jacks. Shahr, so thank you for so many best practices and strategies for how to really get that course organized. But as we think about all the kids, and I'm guessing you maybe see upwards of 150 kids in a day at Summit Lakes, what do you find as a benefit of organization for all those learning styles that come into your classroom every, 45 minutes or so? Do you think have some things that maybe stand out because I had these intents as a teacher? What was the benefit to the kids?
Yeah. So I think the number one thing is less stress and frustration on the part of the student, because the student isn't focusing on finding, they are focusing on completing the assignment, working on the activity, learning, actually engaging with what the activity is asking them to do. And so it's more quality because they have more time focused on what they're actually doing versus trying to find it. And in class, I think that's really important because not every student is going to advocate for themselves if they can't find the link, and they'll go to that 45. They'll be like, yeah, I'm there. And so I also then think it's helpful to engage my students. So I have every year identify students who are kind of like my Schoology pros that are really good at like turning in assignments and just understanding kind of the tricky parts of navigating Schoology. And so that they're there to always help each other out and kind of engage with each other to make sure we're all on the same page. And I think that helps create less stress and more community. During virtual learning, I would say that it definitely had a positive impact on parent communication as well, because I tried to make sure that everything was streamlined for the students, but then I also would send an email communication kind of outlining what it looked like so that the parents would know as well. And because of that, my parent communication tended to be less about like finding the assignment or getting assignments turned in or links not working, and more positive feedback based on things that their kids were doing in the classroom. And so that was kind of nice because it engaged that communication as well. And then I just think that it's clearer for the students when they look at it. So I organize everything underneath the unit folder. I use the learning target number, and the kids kind of learn, okay, the first number is the unit, the second number is the target. And I don't care that they memorize what those numbers are, but what helps them is that when they come into the classroom, they see on the board that we're on, unit 7, target 2. So they know when they're reviewing that those are all the things that they can look at. So anything that says 7.2 next to it is going to be helpful for them. And then in the classroom, our notes are also organized by learning target, so they can scan through their notes like, okay, here's the stuff over target 2. This is what I need to review. So I think it helps students understand what they're learning and what they're being graded on a little bit more clearly. And then also one of the biggest things that I do for my students is I ask them for feedback all of the time. They're the ones that have been in all of these classes, and they have had a million teachers use Schoology in a lot of different ways. And so I constantly am asking them for feedback. What do they like? What's helpful for them? And so we'll try out new things over the course of the year and be vulnerable, but then I get their feedback and we go from there and reevaluate.
Thanks. So many great ways to engage the kids, but then I love how you're talking about really putting students in that leadership position. As young as 7th grade, they can support their peers and really allow you to then maybe readjust based on their needs. I had a few thoughts about when to show the screenshots we have of your course, and I think so many of your points are appropriate to kind of let our listeners and viewers see your course setup. So I think this is what you were mentioning for your virtual learning, just how you reacted to the needs of the springtime and our shutdown experience. And then the second clip we have is, I'm thinking, was more of your face-to-face, but I love how you're talking about organizing by units, and you kept that consistent, and the kids had that visual cue to know exactly where they should be.
Thank you.
So great ways to engage them.
And Shahr, I'll chime in here. As we look at your course, I'm super happy that we have these screenshots for everyone to be able to see and for you to be able to speak to a little bit. I also want to highlight and pull out the fact that I think it's awesome that you ask your students for feedback, because they're the ones going to 8 to 10 different classes throughout their day in middle school and seeing how different teachers organize, or maybe the lack of organization, unfortunately, in some environments. And so I think getting their feedback on the easiest way to find things is huge. Along those lines, as you start the school year, looking forward to the fall, whether we're face-to-face or virtual, how does it look for you as a teacher to communicate about your students, or to communicate to your students and to their families about your digital learning environment? What does that process look like for you?
Yes, the question that we're all thinking about and ruminating about, right? What? If we can take the screenshot back one, then I'll show you kind of what one of the things that I do. So first of all, I would say virtual learning. I already thought screencasts were pretty awesome, and I use them quite a bit, but I would definitely say that virtual learning is that is the power of the screencast. And so I'm like a typical person. I don't really want my face in things, but I did start putting my face in all my screencasts because, when I don't see my babies, I have to have them see me. So it allows for that communication. So screencasts, I would say, are super powerful, and definitely include yourself, even if it's a little tiny bubble at the bottom. At the very top, it says virtual classroom information. So when we first went to this environment, I had that as a page that presented. So it was the full view, and it had the office hours, and it had a video that was an online tour of the class. It broke down the emojis, anything like that, kind of explaining to kids what's the due date, and what do I do if I miss an assignment, and all of that kind of nitty-gritty details. So I sent that same screencast to all of my parents. And no matter what, when we go back, we're going to have a lot of communication with our families. And so I like to give both sets, my parents and my students, the same information, but I don't give my parents the assessment part. So my parents get, the online tour, they get that little quick overview, just a snippet kind of about what our class is like, whether it's in person or not, and just a link to our Schoology tutorial. I think is really helpful for parents. And I think that most important thing about Schoology for parents is that they know that we're here to help them. Schoology is not a native thing for most of our parents. It's not natural. It's not intuitive for them because they're not using it all of the time. When you're using it all of the time, it makes sense. And so I want to make sure that parents know that I'm available for them, and that I don't want Schoology to be a source of frustration. So if they're ever having any frustration, that they can reach out to me is one of the big things for parents. For students, I give them that same screencast. This year, I gave them, I did as an Edpuzzle assessment. So an Edpuzzle allows you to insert questions into the video, and so that the students are immediately responding, okay, what does this mean? How does this impact my grade? What are the due dates? When are her office hours? Basic information on the side. And Edpuzzle is really, really awesome with Schoology. They work really nicely together, and you can embed everything. And so I really highly recommend checking out the Edpuzzle video on our YouTube channel. Jeff made it. It's great. It's super easy to do. In fact, really, you just need you pause the video and then it takes 30 seconds to do. And then, so that helped. But also another thing that I've utilized before when teaching kids kind of what are the procedures is the power of the assessment feature in Schoology, specifically the hotspot assessment feature, where I can take a screenshot of my course and I can ask the kids, okay, where do I click if I want to get to this? If I want to get to this resource, if I want to get to notebook updates, which when I look at this screen, right, I see notebook updates. I'm like, duh, they don't see that. And so even though we're getting used to them, we have to train students how to use our courses sometimes. And so I find that the hotspot assessment feature is really awesome to utilize for that. And then other than that, yeah, I just want to make sure that the graded material, so whatever's showing up in my gradebook is the exact same name in Schoology. I found that was a source of frustration for parents in the spring, was that things would be called something in Schoology and then not the same thing in what we use as PowerSchool and secondary. So I want to make sure that parents and students know that it's always going to be called the exact same thing, so that they know if they're missing something, where to look as well. So I think just communication and being vulnerable with parents, I think, and students is super important as we navigate this
this crazy world we live in, right?
Yeah.
Shar, those were some awesome tips. Thank you so much for sharing them. I know that one of the cool things about the LMS we use, being Schoology, is that it allows parents basically just to toggle to their child and see Schoology as the student sees Schoology. And so all of those tips you give to organize your course for your students and communicate about your organization with them are also applicable and viewable by parents. And so I love that about our LMS. And just to add to what you said, I really think that if we get the opportunity to be face-to-face with students in the fall, or hopefully when we get that opportunity, I think it's vital. And I learned this from, shout out to Jill Rice, who now is a Schoology employee, that we use our, whether it be a website or an LMS, whatever it is that we use to communicate our content, we use that in front of the students, and we navigate for them, and they learn by watching us initially, right? And the more we do that, the better off we're going to be. So, Shar, thank you for sharing all those tips about communication. I'm going to toss it to Jeff for our last question to you.
Well, I have to give you a shout out too. You mentioned screencasting, using video. That's going to be something that we'll talk about, not this week, but in coming weeks on the same, can I call it a program? I don't know, whatever we're doing right now with YouTube Live. We're going to be talking about video and kind of some of the best practices. How do you navigate that? What do you do? Where do I start? And that's kind of what I'm going to do with you, Shar. Last question. Some of the viewers here, some of the people watching, some of the people watching right now live, and some of the people watching later on are new to using a digital environment, something like Schoology, right? And we're giving you a platform. Mention to us, what advice would you give, whether it's one thing, whether it's two things, concerning organizing digital content for students? Where would you recommend colleagues to begin learning about this topic? Where do you start? What do you do? People that are just dipping their toe in the water, what do you have for them?
So this is a tricky question sometimes, because we as educators are natural collaborators, but we are not sometimes good at asking for help. And so the biggest tip, honestly, that I have, no matter what, is to communicate with our students, to ask our students. Now, obviously, we don't have that benefit at this exact moment. So for me, it's asking people in your department, people that you collaborate with, maybe having a time when we go back and asking everyone to show what they do in their courses, open up their archived course and see, because I think that a lot of times we get ideas from seeing what other people do. I also think that I know I grew the most in my Schoology use. I was very hesitant at first. I was pretty hardcore Google, and I was like, I'm not switching. And then I was like, okay, I'm switching. And then I loved it because, yeah, everything's all together. And the biggest way that I learned how to utilize all those tools was through the classes that are offered through LSR 7. They are always manageable as far as the coursework goes as a teacher, but I'm also always creating things that I'm going to be using. So it's awesome because it's kind of like I'm getting credit for planning, which is rare sometimes in education to feel like you're getting credit for planning time. So I think that's really helpful. And I think just going in with what is the purpose of your Schoology course. So for me in my class, as the content that I teach, it is a lot of resources. It is used daily in my classroom. But if I'm teaching an industrial tech class, it might not be daily. So then what's the purpose of my course? Is my course the purpose to give kids maybe videos of demos in case they missed, or maybe extension activities? Maybe, maybe Joe or Cindy have their parents and they love to woodwork with them or something. And then they can use some of those activities as extensions. So I think it's first starting with what's your purpose, and then obviously collaborating, and whether that be your colleagues or whether that be your students. I think that that's really important as we head forward.
I love that. Shar, you have said so many amazing things, and I want to keep following up. I'm going to try to review our last 30 minutes together, but it's going to be tough. We first kind of started talking about student experience, not just the teacher experience, not just what makes sense in my brain. How do I make this work for students? And sometimes that involves decluttering. John talked a little bit about modeling for students, as well as you, like, I'm going to use this in front of my students. Sometimes those things are going to be easy. Thinking about, will it be easy for my students to get here? I love the ideas of talking about, when I am organized, it's less stressful for my students. That way that we can get some of the quality, we can get past that. I'm searching, I'm trying, I'm distracted by the environment. technology should be somewhat seamless, that what we're doing should be like an automatic, and we get those benefits. You talked a lot about communication, being consistent, going through procedures, getting parents involved, giving them that parent access, reaching out to them often in order to help support, because parents are huge in the learning of our students. But really also then asking people in our department, asking students, asking other colleagues, taking classes. Big plug to Dr. Daniel and the graduate course and continuing education courses here in Lee Summit. Fantastic instruction that goes on. But really coming back to, what is the purpose of what I'm doing? What is the purpose? And with all these things in mind, with all these things, everything we talked about is important for each of us, really to stay connected and to stay organized, whatever the fall might bring. So thank you so much for that.
I'm going to look to the YouTube chat right now, and it looks like we have a comment from one of your colleagues, Bonnie, over at Summit Lakes. And she says, Shar, you're awesome. So happy to hear from you. And thanks for sharing all your great ideas. So,
hi, Bonnie.
Hi to Bonnie. Wish that we had some more questions, but I know that a lot of folks are going to go back and watch this later to be able to think about their digital learning environment coming up next year. And it's going to be available in the micro courses, along with the micro courses for Connected and Organized in the LSR 7 Schoology Educators group. So Corey, tell us more about that.
Yeah, John, thank you. And anybody that is watching this later, please, if you're a Lee Summit R7 employee, join us in those micro course discussions in the R7 Educators group, and comment on your thinking about what Shar engaged us in this morning, and all those great tips to really keep us connected and organized, and making sure that we're providing that experience for kids that the best possible way we can, whether we're virtual or face-to-face. Those discussions can be really, as deep and engaged as much as you would like, and as deep as you would like to go as an educator. And it's not just for teachers. There's a lot of micro course topics that have to do with our other staff members that support our kids in Lee Summit. So please join us there. And we are connected and organized this week.
Yep. Well, Shar, thank you again for joining us. Jeff, Corey, thanks for great questions and for really a great discussion here as we met to discuss being organized and connected in our digital learning environment. If people want to engage in this more broadly, again, we're on YouTube Live. I'll direct you to Twitter, a great professional learning network. And if you haven't started learning from Twitter yet, I would really encourage that you create an account and get on and learn from other educators, because it will expand your horizons. You can follow this conversation and our summer learning right from your phone, as Jeff just showed, but by following hashtag R7, so Lee Summit R7, C2L, Connect to Learn. It's our one-to-one learning initiative here in Lee Summit. And follow hashtag R7C2L or our ITS account, which is at LSR7ITS. You can follow that throughout the week. Next week, we're going to be coming and talking about Connected to Colleagues. So Shar mentioned we're natural collaborators. We're going to have some of LSR7's tech reps who are also teachers in the classroom coming to join us and talking about being connected to colleagues. So hopefully that'll be a great show, Tuesday, 9 o'clock next week, July 21st. Shar, final thoughts as you get out of here today? We've appreciated having you.
Thank you so much for having me. I guess my only closing thought would be for people that don't find organization natural to it's, you don't have to use all of the extra stuff. I think just starting with your purpose and how you'd organize your folders, I think that's the starting point. So I know not everyone that is into this sort of thing like I am. My books are color coded. So I understand, but that also I'm a resource. So if anyone needs any assistance or has any questions, they can reach out to me as well.
You're awesome, Shar. Thank you so much. And thanks to everyone watching. Stay connected and organized. Bye, guys.